In today's practice, I'm going to show you how you can round to the nearest 10 in larger numbers and how you can round to the nearest 100. Our standard is 4 MBT3, so you're supposed to be doing this rounding on a number line so that you can see where numbers fall on a number line and what they're closest to. So as we start with rounding to the nearest 10, you will see on my screen, get rid of this, there we go. You can see on my screen that I'm starting with the example 264, and this 6 is underlined because that's the tens place. So what I did at the top is I skip counted by tens so that I could help my brain see what the nearest tens would be. So if I were in the 60s, like 264, I know I'm going to be starting at 60, and the next 10 on my number line would be 70. And you can see in the example down here that I've started with 260, okay? And I span all the way to 270, and right here, where this dot is, that is 264. That's where it would go on the number line. Okay, so this is 264, and if you don't see that, what I mean is if this is 260, then 261, 262, 263, 264, and then the midpoint, halfway between 260 and 270, would be 265. Either way, this picture gives me a clear image. It shows me that 264 is closer to 260. So what that means is 264 rounded to the nearest 10 is 260. You'll also notice that there is something that didn't change in this number, and that's the hundreds place. I'm not rounding to the hundreds, so the hundreds doesn't change. It stays 200. The only thing changing is my tens place and my ones place, okay? So now we're going to go ahead and try with another one, and we're rounding to the tens place. So we're rounding to this place right here, 7, the 70. So on my number line, I'm going to start at 370 right here, 370. Okay. And the next 10 from 370 would be, well, we know the next 10 after 70 is, look up here at the top, 80. So that means on the other side, my number line is going to be 380. Okay. And you don't have to put the midpoint, but you see this dark line in the middle. That's a way for you to put a midpoint. And the midpoint is always going to be like a halfway point. And we know if we're dealing with tens, or hundreds or thousands, a halfway point is always going to have a 5, the digit 5 in it. So like if we were rounding to the nearest 10, that means that the ones place would be a 5. If I'm rounding to the nearest hundreds, then 50 would be the midpoint. And if I'm rounding to the nearest thousands, 500 is the midpoint. That just means that is the middle of 0 to that number you're rounding to, okay? So I know that I can even count the ticks on the line. So 71, 72, 73, 74, 75. 375 is the midpoint here. Okay. So I'm just going to mark that this first time. It's just helpful. And this is going to give me a better idea of where 378 goes, although I could have already counted the tick lines to find out. But so if I start 370, then 371, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, and 78. I know that 78 is right here. So I'm going to write 378 on my number line. And I can clearly look at this picture and look at this blue dot. That's where 378 is. And then I ask myself, which 10 is it closer to? Is it closer to 370, or is it going to be closer to 380? And the closest 10 is that 80. So I would write on this line 380. Okay. All right. We'll do one more example, but I want us to move now to rounding to the hundreds place. Okay. So this is rounding to the nearest hundreds. You're going to notice this number line looks different. There are smaller lines on this number line, and that's because we're dealing with bigger numbers. So our number line has to have more spaces on it because we're not just jumping 10 spaces. Look, we're jumping 100. We're going from 500 to 600. So we have tiny little ticks, little marks on the number line to show that's 100. Like from 500 to this next space right here, that's 10. 520, 530, 540, 550, 560, 570, 580, 590, and then 600. So you can still count by tens on this number line, but this number line just looks different because we're having to show 100 spaces rather than on our last ones just showing a jump of 10. Okay, so I just wanted to show you guys that. But in this example, we were given 537, and you had to put that on the number line. And of course, if we're rounding to the nearest 100, then I know that when I skip count by hundreds, it's just like skip counting by tens. Okay, I know if I skip count by hundreds, that 537 is going to fall between 500 and 600. So on our number line, I've started at 500, I ended at 600, and then I wanted to show where 537 falls between those two numbers. And if you're looking at this number line, you can clearly see that 537 is closer to 500. So we would say 537 rounds to 500. Okay, so let's do some examples. So we're going to start with this first number that we have here. And this first number is 428. Now, of course, we're paying attention to that 400. I'm not rounding to my tens anymore. I'm rounding to my hundreds. So if I really need to, there's no shame. I'm just going to write my hundreds up here. And it will just help me with my skip counting if I need help with making my number line. Okay, so I'm going to have that as a guide at the top. Well, when I look at 428, it is very, very clear to me that 428 falls between 400 and 500. So on my number line, I'm going to start my number line at 400. Okay, and then I'm going to end it at 500. Okay, and now I just need to figure out where this 428 is going to go on my number line. Where would 428 go? There's a lot of spaces on here, and again, we can recount that so you guys can see. These, this number line's broken up, like I said, into smaller pieces because we're now having to show 100 places. So it might help here to label our tens so you can see. So up above, right here, this would be 410. So just take a moment and I'll show you. 410 would be right here, this line. And then 420 would be right here. And then of course 430, 440, 450. I'm not going to label all of them. Okay. Labeling that midpoint is always helpful for sure. But I remember I'm trying to find 428. Well, I found 420. And I can count these tiny dashes, so 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. If I look here on this number line, 428 is like right about there where that yellow dot is. So if I look at that yellow dot, I can see that 428, I'm going to label it. I know that 428 is definitely closer to 400. So like look how far 500 is away from that. So I'm going to say that 428 rounds to 400. All right, you guys. We're going to do one more example together. So we're going to do another example together, just one more. Before I do that, let's refresh. Okay, get rid of those highlights. Okay, so our next problem we're going to we're doing the same thing, but now we have 949, okay? And I already know that 949 is in the 900s. Now, I didn't include on this skip counting chart what comes after 900, but honestly, that is something we should know. After 900 comes 1,000, okay? And I don't think I'm going to be able to show that without it running over. But after 900 comes 1,000. So on my number line, I'm going to start at 900. Okay. And then it's going to end at 1,000. I'm just trying to see, is 949 closer to 900 or is it closer to 1,000? Right? And so I just need to find where 949 is going to go. I can skip count and label these tens if that's helpful. I'm just going to do that so I can get to the midpoint. So the midpoint's like where this number line splits in half. It's basically telling me what's half of 900 and 1,000. What's the midpoint? So I'm going to start at 900 and I'm going to count these bigger lines. So 900, 910, 920, 930, 940, 950. That's just going to help me know where to place this. Okay. All right. I see 950 right there in the middle, and I'm remembering that I'm plotting 949, which is super close to 950. Like, it's one digit away, one away. So I'm going to plot that on my number line as best as I can, right about there. That is where my 949 would be. Label that right above. Okay, my 949 is right about there. So this is a tricky one. It's so close to 950. If it were greater than 950, then I would round this number to 1,000. But it's actually less than 950. So because it's less, we would say it's closer to 900. So 949 rounds to 900. Okay. As you guys are working today, you're going to be doing some practice with this. I highly encourage you to use the number lines to help you. If you need to skip count at the top to help you know how to label your number line, you can do that, okay? So good luck, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.